Y'all, thank you. Dave King, thank you. I appreciate our long friendship. It goes all the way back to Reagan in '76. And thank you for that warm welcome. Speaking of warm, man, this global warming is about to freeze me to death. You know, I've spoken here many times, and over the years, this conference usually focuses on what's wrong with the left. To deal with that subject today would take a month, not just a weekend. The policies of the left are why, since the last time I spoke at CPAC, our political fortunes have changed dramatically. 7 new Republican senators, 29 Republican governors, including 9 out of 10 of the key swing states for 2012, more than 600 new Republican state legislators, and the largest Republican majority in the U.S. House of Representatives in 65 years. You know what we call that in Mississippi? A pretty good start. The 2010 election was the greatest repudiation of the policies of a president and a party in American history. November 2nd was the crescendo of a stunning rejection of a leftist political philosophy that's profoundly at odds with America's founding principles and our history of democratic self-government and entrepreneurial capitalism. For 2 years, the Obama administration and the Democrat Congress pursued an agenda bent on fulfilling the pent-up demands of every frustrated liberal at the expense of the public good and contrary to the will of the people. When America needed a growth strategy to revive our recession-racked economy, the Obama administration and the Pelosi-Reed Congress gave us a $1 trillion stimulus bill that only stimulated more government. As unemployment soared to 10%, America needed and called for policies that would spur job creation. Instead of focusing on jobs, the Obama administration and its Democrat Congress spent a year concocting a government-run health care system, one that stifles job creation as well as drives up the cost of health care. At a time when we desperately needed incentives to create new jobs, President Obama and his congressional allies tried to impose the biggest tax increase in American history on small business owners by letting the Bush tax cuts expire. 2 years of their calling for these massive tax increases caused more uncertainty among employers, making them reluctant to hire new workers or to spend any money until they could see how high their tax burden would be. And along the way, the President and the Democrat Congress pushed federal government spending to 25% of GDP, sucking trillions of dollars out of the productive private economy. They forget that every dollar taxed or borrowed by the government is a dollar that can't be invested by an entrepreneur or small business person in a job-creating product or facility. A dollar that can be saved by a family hoping to send their children to college. You know, in the liberal ideology, every dollar earned belongs to the government. They believe reducing taxes is some kind of government giveaway to the taxpayers. Despite job creations being the top priority for our country, this Obama's policies have been more hostile to job creation than any other I've ever seen. Now, after his policies have contributed to unemployment rates stuck at 9+% for almost 2 years, suddenly President Obama and the Democrats are paying lip service to job creation. Except this time they called their spending investments rather than stimulus. Happily, the new conservative majority in the House understands that jobs are created by the private sector, not by government. Never forget, a bigger government means a smaller economy. Because of last year's election, we've extended the Bush tax cuts for another 2 years. And Republicans will cut spending and take the first step toward restoring sanity to the federal budget. These are important accomplishments, but as I said, they're only a start. We want an important victory in November, but we don't control the government. Our House majority only gives us control of 1/2 of 1/3 of our national government. Our new majority can stop the worst excesses of exhausted liberalism. We can stop funding for bad policies. We could push for less spending. We could use the House's oversight authority to expose the damage being done by the blizzard of Obama administration job-crushing regulations. But we can't today do what needs to be done for our country. So as we prepare for, starting today, for the next 21 months, I ask you to remember the words of my fellow Mississippian, Fred Smith, the founder and CEO of FedEx. Fred says, the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. And the main thing is electing a Republican president next year. We can't put America on the right track until we elect a Republican president in 2012 and a Republican Senate to join the Republican House in enacting those crucial policies. We won't have the policies that lead to economic growth, job creation, smaller government, lower taxes, less spending, rational regulation, and a stronger American presence in the world in every dimension until we have a Republican president to lead for those right policies, the ones that will achieve the right results for America and the world. Make no mistake, the reckless policies of the Obama administration and the left-wing Congress have brought America to a crossroads. The Congressional Budget Office informs us this year's deficit will hit a staggering record $1.5 trillion. For every dollar it spends, the federal government will have to borrow 40 cents, much of it from the Chinese government. And my generation's children and grandchildren, that's many of you, will be handed the bill, a gargantuan debt for you to pay. In fact, CBO reports that this year the federal government will spend $3.7 trillion, but will only take in $2.2 trillion. Friends, our problem is not that we tax too little, it's that we spend too much. But Washington needs to understand the federal government can't spend itself rich any more than your family can spend itself rich. You know, I remember how the liberals used to mock my old boss, Ronald Reagan, and his belief that lower taxes would spur economic growth and improve the nation's balance sheet. They laughed and said, we can't grow ourselves out of the deficit. Well, let me tell you something. It's a lot easier to grow yourself out of the deficit than it is to spend yourself out of the deficit. Well, let me give you a little personal example. In my first 4 years as governor of Mississippi, we got rid of a huge budget shortfall because revenue went up by 40% without raising anybody's taxes. Revenue went up because we had more taxpayers with more taxable income. That's the way to get your balance sheet where you want it. Now we got to be honest with each other. The failure to control federal spending occurred under Republicans as well as Democrats. though I have to say it's gotten a whole lot worse in the last 2 years. Consider this. It took about 220 years for the American government to accumulate $5 trillion in debt. Under the Obama administration, our debt will grow by $5 trillion in less than 4 years. To me, that's breathtaking. And it's why I pray and believe that Republicans in Congress, Republican legislators, Republican governors will be faithful to the will the American people expressed in November. And from my experience as governor, I know Congress can reduce spending. I watched Mitch Daniels give Indiana its first balanced budget in 8 years without raising taxes. I saw Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell come into office facing a deficit in excess of $2 billion. He canceled the big tax increase, got control of spending, and now has a surplus of more than $400 million. And Chris Christie has shown us that responsible spending cuts can be achieved and popular even in a usually blue state like New Jersey. A lot of people think while Republican governors were attacking fiscal issues, we were ignoring social issues. Well, that's not right. My first year as governor, my pro-life agenda was adopted by my Democrat majority legislature, and Americans United for Life, I am proud to say, named Mississippi the safest place in America for an unborn child. Governors get elected to solve problems, and that's why in the recent years you see governors focused on economic problems and budgets and spending. As I mentioned, that year that we passed the pro-life agenda, Mississippi had a $720 million budget shortfall, about 20% of the total general fund. It took us 2 years, but we eliminated that deficit without raising anybody's taxes. More recently, when the recession hit our state, as I am allowed to do by law as governor, I cut spending 9.4%, about $500 million. We governors cut spending, including some Democrat governors like Phil Bredesen of Tennessee. So I know Congress can cut spending too. And I know from my experience, there's plenty to cut. When I cut spending by 10% in one fiscal year, I said I didn't think most people in Mississippi even noticed. Of course, the liberals and the advocates whined and moaned. Our liberal media elite especially criticized my savings in Medicaid, our only big entitlement in Mississippi. Those savings have been very large, hundreds of millions of dollars. One way was to make sure everybody receiving Medicaid was actually eligible. There's an idea. Under my Democratic successor, Medicaid rolls in Mississippi had expanded from about 500,000 people to about 750,000 in just 4 years. The good news, he wasn't there but 4 years. A key reform we made when I got into office was to require recipients who aren't in nursing homes or immobile because of their health to reestablish their Medicaid eligibility in person annually. It's funny how many people never even showed up. After my reforms, and this was in good economic times, the rolls fell from nearly 750,000 to fewer than 600,000, a reduction of more than 20%. Another change was to emphasize strong management. So our Medicaid error rate is now the 4th lowest in the country, less than half the national average, about half of the error rate for the federal Medicare program. Now, why is that important? I'll tell you why. Our state taxpayers save about $50 million a year just because of our lower error rate. That would be tens of billions in savings for the federal government in Medicaid and Medicare if the national error rate were simply the same as that of the Mississippi Medicaid program. We can save money on entitlements. You just got to have the willpower and the courage to do it. Governors deal with problems, and voters have decided from here on out, leaders should be judged not by their hopes or their intentions. Leaders must be judged by the results they achieve. That fact is why President Obama started to sound like Ronald Reagan for the last several weeks. I was political director of the White House for 2 years under President Reagan. I can tell you, Reagan would have recognized this ploy as just another play from the Democrat playbook. Fake up the middle, then run around left end. Spending becomes investments. Non-defense discretionary spending should be capped, but at a level 27% higher than it was just 2 years ago. The most job-stifling regulatory regime in history, that of Barack Obama and Carol Browner, will be reviewed. The president even told Bill O'Reilly Sunday that taxes hadn't gone up during his first 2 years. What he failed to mention was the lack of a huge tax increase was solely because he couldn't get any Republican senators to vote for his proposal for the largest tax increase in American history. And then he told us in his own State of the Union address that he would push for that gigantic tax increase in this Congress. You know, the Gipper would have chuckled and shook his head because he'd seen the left trot out this old movie many times before. Americans have told us they want responsible government, one that respects the limits of government enshrined in our Constitution. They want policies that enhance individual freedom, not expand government control. They believe in personal responsibility, not government dependency. If Republicans are not faithful to these principles, I'll tell you, we'll be defeated as quickly as the Democrats, and we'll deserve to be. The Obama policies of raising taxes, explosive spending, skyrocketing debt, and government-run health care are probably subjects that you're pretty familiar with. Let's talk about another job growth killer you don't hear about as much, the Obama energy policy. And I'm glad to hear my old friend, Speaker Newt Gingrich, also talk to you about energy. Just as Obamacare will increase the cost of health care, the Obama energy policy is driving up the cost of energy, and not by accident. And remember, while health care is 18% of the American economy, energy costs affect 100% of our economy. You remember the cap and trade tax? Well, in 2008, before he was elected in November, then Senator Obama told the San Francisco Chronicle, under my plan of a cap and trade system, electricity rates would necessarily skyrocket. And if Senate Republicans hadn't killed the cap and trade tax, the electric bills for working Americans would have skyrocketed. except there would be even fewer Americans working if that happened. American manufacturing would be crushed by Obama's energy proposals. But he hadn't given up. His moratorium on the Gulf of Mexico oil drilling has become a permatorium. More Alaskan oil has been placed off limits. The technology hydraulic fracturing that makes possible the huge increase in natural gas production from shale formations is under attack. Permits to mine coal are harder to get in America than a heart transplant. The Wall Street Journal recently reported U.S. domestic oil production will fall 13% this year. And that is part of Obama's strategy. The Obama administration is trying to achieve by regulation what it can't pass through Congress. In one sense, the Obama energy policy is this: increase the price of energy so Americans will use less of it. They are pursuing that policy to reduce pollution and to make extremely expensive, uneconomic alternative fuels cost competitive. This is not an energy policy. This is an environmental policy. So as gas blows by $3 a gallon on its way to $4 and more, remember what Energy Secretary Stephen Chu, a member of the Obama administration's cabinet today, said in a 2008 speech. Somehow we have to figure out how to boost the price of gasoline to the levels in Europe. Gasoline in Europe is $8 or $9 a gallon. Secretary Chu may think we need that, but I doubt it's going to get many votes in this conference. These energy policies are catastrophic for America's economy. Such policies would destroy our ability to compete in the global marketplace because of cost. What we need is more American energy. The American worker can compete with anybody in the world if we don't tie a millstone around his neck. And we're not going to allow the Obama administration to do that through energy policy. The fellow conservatives, 2012 will be the year of decision. Last year, Americans didn't give the GOP a mandate to govern. They gave us a chance to earn their trust and support. So now let's make the most of it. As we prepare to complete our victory by electing a Republican Senate and the White House in 2012, let me remind you of what I said at this conference last year as chairman of the Republican Governors Association. I said if the 2010 campaigns were about issues, Republicans would win a huge victory. That's because the American people agree with us on the issues. It's why they massively repudiated Obama's policies last November. The left and their allies in the liberal media elite like to describe conservatives, especially Tea Party activists, as somehow out of the mainstream, a bunch of unsophisticated know-nothings. The leftist media says the Tea Party's a problem for Republicans. Now this is a case of the left whistling past the graveyard. Americans motivated to participate in the Tea Party movement were upset by the very same policy issues as Republican volunteers and leaders: jobs and economic growth, reckless spending, skyrocketing deficits and debt, an energy policy that drives up energy costs, and a government-run health care system that drives up health care costs. Rather than divide us, these are the issues that unite us. Unite us as conservatives, unite us as Republicans, and unite us as Americans. The left, you know, psychiatrists say that it's bad to stifle the urge to applaud. If it's not bad for you, it's bad for me. So I appreciate the perseverance. But what the left doesn't want to admit, and what the news media doesn't want to write or broadcast, is that the average American agrees with us on policy and issues. That's why Republican candidates last year won the votes of independents by 20 percentage points. And as I promised you last year, if the 2012 campaign's about issues, independents will again join us in getting our country turned around and back on the right track, with a larger economy and a smaller government, lower taxes and more Americans working, a falling deficit as we have more taxpayers with more taxable income, more American energy, Obamacare repealed and replaced by an improved system where you and your doctor control your health care choices. We know prosperity results from an economy based on creating wealth, not redistributing it. And if you truly care about helping the least among us and lifting people out of poverty, history proves you should favor a system of democratic capitalism over a centralized, government-managed economy. Now, I assure you, if we offer this conservative vision next year, it will be embraced by Main Street business owners and Walmart mothers, by American workers, corporate executives, and mama grizzlies, by Tea Party activists, rank and file Republicans, and independent voters. Our agenda is America's agenda. And with your help, our team will be America's team, the winning team in 2012. Let me close by remembering today would be the 202nd birthday of Abraham Lincoln, father of our party and the first Republican president. Lincoln saved our country, one nation, indivisible. And he established our party as the party of freedom. And so we are today, the party of freedom, so that every American is free to work hard and make the most of his or her God-given talents, to stand equal before the law, to pray to their own God or no God, and to have a government that is of the people, by the people, and for the people, rather than a people controlled by their government. These are the reasons Lincoln said, America is the last best hope on earth, and so shall she ever be. Thank you, and God bless you. Thank you.
And if that bothers you, well, that's too bad. But if you got pride and you're proud you do,